Well, hey there, welcome back to Return to Yehovah. Haven't done a lot of videos over the last couple months. Just been, I don't know, other things going on or not feeling like there was something to talk about. So obviously I'm not in this for anything other than to try to communicate something that might be worthwhile of God's Word or the things I've been learning. But I decided, I was out for a walk today, decided I'd talk about something that has come to light in the last week. If you're following some form of a biblical calendar, citing the moon and/or the rabbinic calendar that's been pre-calculated, if you're following, you may or may not be aware that this year the new moon that was just sighted a handful of days ago, I don't have the calendar in front of me, but just to begin this 7th month, and I'll make a asterisk, I know some people think this is already the 8th month based on how they see the barley being Aviv, okay, but that's another story. So to me and for me, this is the 7th month. When the new moon was sighted, it was Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets, day of blowing, day of shouting, and we're coming up in a couple of days here to Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and then a few days later, 5 days later, we're going to be starting Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. So what am I even bringing that up about? A friend of mine pointed out, and it was a good thing to think about, that this year at least, and it happens once in a while, the calendar that the rabbis pre-calculated happened to actually line up with when the first sliver of the new moon was sighted in the sky. And it's sighted from Jerusalem. You have to have at least 2 witnesses and all of that, and there's people that have been keeping track of that and doing that for many, many years. I want to say a couple decades. I don't know if it goes maybe 30 years. I don't know, but anyhow, so it's not some fly-by-night group. But anyhow, it's kind of interesting because those of us that go by sighting the new moon, it seems like almost every month and virtually every year, the calendar that we consider the biblical one based on the moon is almost always different than what the rabbis have calculated. And I'm not saying it's a bunch of rabbis every year that gets around and calculates it, but it's the Hillel calendar or whatever they call it now, but it's the one that pretty much all of Judaism and just about any calendar you get in this world that bothers to list Jewish holidays, as they call them, will show the dates, in advance, so you can plan ahead and know exactly what day will be what. But those of us that go by the new moon sighting, we know that, like when Yeshua talked about the day and the hour that no man knows, that is a great, representation of the sighting of the moon. Because you can go out fully expecting that you should be able to see the new moon on a certain night, but if you're in Jerusalem and for only purposes that God knows, if he decides that he doesn't want anybody to see that night, you're not going to see it. Okay, and then depending on where you are in the month, or in the month, which day it is, whether it's the 29th day or the 30th day of the month, it may or may not be by default that the next day is considered the the day of the new moon or the beginning of the new month and all. But I don't want to get too far off on that. I just think it's very interesting that this year they line up. And I don't know if I expressed much in videos, but it's been a real frustration over, for several years. For a while, I was part of a decent-sized group where we had several families that would get together, and we would go out each month and look for the moon. Not necessarily a bunch of us, but for sure, like around the 7th month, we'd sometimes gather at somebody's house and look for the moon, and when we saw it, we'd blow the shofar, and several people would do it, adults and kids, and it was a lot of fun, and I got to do that with one family this year, and that was kind of fun, just having the little kids blowing it. I don't think I showed a video of the little ones doing it, but anyhow, but yet a lot of people I know, and from some groups I communicate with about the Torah and Yeshua and all that, they have no interest in the sighting of the moon. They strictly go by the pre-calculated calendar, and I don't know if it's just for ease of doing or because they just don't. I mean, well, most of what I've heard, people don't trust that people that aren't following the rabbi's ways or the orthodox ways, whatever term they use, they feel like if they're doing it outside of what is approved by the rabbis, then it's not valid and not having authority. So there's a lot of people still, even after all that Yeshua did for us, they still believe that, followers of, well, really Messiah and of the Torah are under the mantle or under the rule of the rabbinic teachings. And, I learned, several years ago that a lot of those just do not make sense. They contradict the Torah or they contradict each other, but again, I'm not here to beat up anybody that's doing that. I'm just saying, I learned a handful of years ago that I wanted to follow the way that is just what's written in the Torah, and we just go by that, okay? And that's what sighting the new moon, that's a system that does that. This is not some man telling us we are going to sight the moon this way or that way. It's in the Torah. I mean, granted, you might go to some people that have been doing it for years and get some pointers from them, but, I've been out there, I don't know how many, well, probably good 5 or 6 years going out looking for the moon. Some nights, when I should have seen it or when they've seen it in Jerusalem, I don't get to see it where I live because it's so cloudy or something like that. Other times I've just about given up and I was ready to go home, and then I look one more time and there it is, and but anyhow, it's one of those things. To me, it's a little tidbit of keeping God's commandments to sight the moon and to blow the shofar, and that kind of thing. Now, obviously, I don't go lighting fires and doing sacrifices or anything like that, but just going out and looking for it and seeking the Lord in that small little way is a piece of keeping his commandment, and but anyhow, so this year, 2019, whatever year you want to call it on your biblical calendar, because there's at least 2 or 3 different schools of thought, and honestly, I don't know what to think. 5780, is it 6019? I mean, I forget what the third one is that I've seen, and I don't have enough information to go on, and honestly, I don't think it really matters right now. To me, those that really want, to know what it is, they may have, legitimate purposes why. Anyhow, so back to the original point, the idea that the calendar that Jewish people all over the world and Messianics and Hebrew roots people or Torah observant followers of Yeshua are going by for their feast days actually line up this year with, the sighting of the moon. Now, it doesn't mean that, the moon sighters got it right once in a while. No, I believe, sighting the moon is what the Bible prescribes, and that's what God instituted. It's when the pre-calculated one actually lines up. And so at least now people that I know from different fellowships and I consider brothers and sisters, we can actually be keeping the feast days on the same days. Doesn't mean we all get together, but instead of a bunch of them getting together at a congregation and fasting and having Yom Kippur, and then me saying, well, technically that's not for 2 more days, but this year we'll be doing it all on the same day. Okay, so it is kind of cool. I know a lot of people in like Christianity and other circles talk about, oh, if we could all have unity, and they quote Yeshua about how he wanted us all to be one and all that kind of thing. But I've also read several good quotes, and I don't have them handy to get them right, from other theologians who have said that, it's not worth it to have unity. This is my paraphrase. If you're having to give up what you believe, like if you sacrifice some things you truly believe just to have unity, that sounds a little, well, it's just not what I want to do. Now, of course, if we don't all agree on a certain day being a feast day or something like that, does it mean that we're enemies or something like that? No, of course not. Of course, it's tough when a whole lot of people don't, realize that the Sabbath is the Sabbath. It's Saturday and not some other day like Sunday, like a lot of churches. And that's a tough nut, because people, that's been their whole life and they just cannot let go of that. Anyhow, so I guess it's just a neat thing that the calendars line up. So even though one of my biggest frustrations earlier this year was when there's a whole group of people that decided, I don't know if they did it this year only for the first time or maybe other years, but all of a sudden I went from being, in agreement as far as citing the moon and Yehovah's name and, so many things that I believe and share with others. And then I find out this whole branch of people decided to go by a totally different way of looking at the barley being Aviv. And now they claim to be able to show in scripture or historical documents or whatever that their way is the right way. And I looked at it, and I don't know 100%, but I know where I learned it and how I learned it years ago. And that way made perfect sense. And those were people that lived in the land, that checked the barley every year. They know exactly what they're talking about. So just because somebody new comes along and wants to tell us a different way, that's not necessarily something I want to just jump on the bandwagon with. So that was a little frustrating this year. It really kind of bummed me out that a whole group of people are going after this other thing. And I don't even think they're following just a man, but they're following an idea. So once again, we're disjointed and not all in agreement. I could see why Yeshua wants us to all be eventually on the same page, because it's a beautiful thing when we can be, Anyhow, I guess that's all I had to say. No, it's not like this is any kind of lesson for anybody, but just sharing a few things that came to mind. And hopefully you're all able to, get on the calendar somehow and keep the feasts that are coming up. We got Yom Kippur on what would be Wednesday this week, October 9th. And then 5 days later begins Feast of Sukkot for 7 days. And there's an 8th day after that. But anyhow, should be, good fun time. And hopefully you can get together with fellow believers and look at the Word and maybe blow a shofar or two. Okay? So anyhow, Yehovah bless you and keep you. Shalom.